Hello learners, welcome back to the course on learning and development in organization. We start with a new module, module 7, which looks into understanding psychological contracts in organization. So this might be a new word, at least for some of you, psychological contract. Others might know it. I'll start from the basics. Do not worry. We'll take everyone together in our sessions. So we'll start with psychological contract. I'm Dr. Abraham Cyril Issac. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into learning and development in organization and specifically psychological contracts, I'll start with a new theme today. Employees don't leave companies. They leave when the promises made to them are broken. So there's a flip side to it. So many a time we see that some individuals within an organization, they feel that they are entitled to get something and they do not get that. They feel disengaged. Whatever they were trying to do, or they were at least showcasing that they were doing as part of their duty, they will stop doing it. It might be a promotion, it might be a spousal recruitment, it might be any case. But the moment you feel that you are not getting something that you should get, provided you are entitled, then there is a disengagement and you start or you stop working and you do not start doing anything. So this is typically the flip side of that. Again, it is all about staying in the company. It is all about retention. And most importantly, it is all about working efficiently when you are within the company. So that is always a different ball game. Let's understand psychological contract in detail. Let's look into the definition and the basic concepts. Psychological contract to me is unwritten expectations. It refers to implicit, informal beliefs about mutual obligations between the employee and the employer. So you and your organization, it might not be on paper. You do this, you'll get a promotion. Your manager would have implied that. You do this, we give you a raise. Your organization would have tacitly, implicitly implied that. So these are psychological contracts. Let's understand the subjectivity with respect to this. It is subjective, but it is evolving. You talk about psychological contracts, you see that the psychological contract is nothing but a foundational concept in OB, organizational behavior and human resource management. Unlike the formal employment contract, which typically outlines the tangible aspects, be it the job title, be it the salary, working hours and duties, the psychological contract is intangible and based on mutual perceptions, assumptions and informal understanding. So in simple terms, it is the mental contract. It is the mental contract that each party holds regarding what they believe the other will deliver and what they are obligated to reciprocate. This concept was first introduced by Chris Argyris 1960, and later if you see the history, it was developed more rigorously by Rousseau in 1989, who emphasized the psychological contract as a more subjective and individual perception of the mutual obligations. Let's take an example. An employee may believe that working overtime occasionally will lead to future promotions, even if this is never formally promised. That belief forms part of their psychological contract. I think you would have got a rough idea about what psychological contract is. Now let's look into the key components of the psychological contract. The first one is mutual benefit. You look into shared understanding of organizational culture, organizational values and expected behaviors. You have mutual beliefs. You look into the perception, personal interpretations of what the employer or employee is supposed to do, and informal obligations are the unwritten commitments like offering career growth, support, loyalty, and going the extra mile altogether. So when you are looking into these elements, please note they are subjective, meaning that different employees in the organization may perceive the contract differently based on their experiences and interactions specifically. So when you look into typically the psychological contract, Chris Argyris 1960 laid the groundwork by describing the psychological contract as an implicit understanding that evolves over time, influenced by socialization and job experiences. As I mentioned earlier, Rousseau 1989 gave the concept more structure by framing it within social exchange theory, which suggests that relationships are based on the expectation of reciprocal benefits. Rousseau emphasized that psychological contracts exist only in the mind of the individual and may or may not be mutually understood. Now, why psychological contract matters in workplace? Undoubtedly, we can say it is for job satisfaction, it is with respect to motivation, it is with respect to organizational commitment, it is with respect to willingness to engage in learning and development, it is with respect to the trust in leadership, it is with respect to the retention and turnover intentions. All these things, for all these things, psychological contract matters because it's rooted in perceived fairness, and any perceived violation can quickly lead to disengagement, even if the formal contract is technically fulfilled. Now let's understand the relevance of psychological contract, why we are discussing this in the context of learning and development. In the context of learning and development, the psychological contract, if you ask me, plays a critical role in how employees perceive access to development opportunities and how they respond to training programs. An example would be that employee, let's say, who believes the organization values growth may expect regular upskilling and career advancement pathways, or if these expectations are not met, let's say, even if not formally promised, these expectations were there and these are not met, then the employees may feel disillusioned or betrayed, leading to disengagement from training. So therefore, managing the psychological contract is essential for L&D professionals to ensure that the employees feel supported. The learning programs are aligned with the employee expectations. And finally, communication about the development opportunities is transparent and realistic. Now let's look into the nature and characteristics of the psychological contract. Please note, there is no doubt about the fact that it is subjective. The psychological contract is inherently subjective, meaning that it exists in the mind of the individual employee and is shaped by their personal interpretations and experiences. Employees may interpret organizational actions or communications differently from how they were intended. For instance, let's say a manager, he may comment like, "We see a bright future for you here." So it might be interpreted by one employee as a promise of promotion, while another might take it as a general encouragement. So what is actually that the manager meant is implicit, it is not explicit. So that is typically a psychological contract and it is different for different people. That is why it is subjective. An implication could be of this is that because it's subjective, multiple psychological contracts can exist within the same team, each unique to individual's role, history and expectations. Please note, it is unwritten. Psychological contracts are not formally documented, making them non-legally binding and often invisible to both parties until a breach is perceived. So this unwritten nature makes them both powerful and fragile. Please note that they often arise from organizational culture, informal conversations, past experiences, recruitment messaging, and managerial behavior. So there is a possibility of it being its strength as well as its weakness. An example would be, let's say during onboarding, an organization may emphasize that it invests in people. An employee might take this as an unwritten commitment to offer a regular training, mentorship and growth opportunities even if none are formally stated. The third important aspect is dynamic. Psychological contracts are not static, they evolve over time based on new information, organizational changes, role transitions, personal development. So, an employee's expectations and perceptions shift with career stage, changes in management, or learning opportunities. For example, an employee who starts as a trainee may initially expect just technical training, but as they mature in organization, their psychological contract may expand to actually include mentoring, leadership development, or succession planning. The fourth aspect is reciprocal. Nature and characteristics of psychological contract, I will undoubtedly say that it is reciprocal. Psychological contracts are built on a sense of reciprocity, a give and take relationship, where employees are willing to invest effort, they are willing to invest commitment, have loyalty. If they perceive the organization values, their contribution fulfills implicit promises. So reciprocity can involve both tangible exchanges, be it training in exchange for performance, or intangible ones. Let's say something like respect, autonomy, or recognition. These are all intangible. It can be loyalty, it can be even recognition in return for loyalty. So all these aspects are intangible, so that is reciprocal. Let's take an example. If an employee consistently goes beyond their job description, they may expect opportunities to learn new skills or be considered for leadership roles. Now let's look into the summary of characteristics. We see that it is subjective. It is based on individual perception. The implication is that it varies across employees. It is unwritten. The description would be informal and non-binding. It is easily misinterpreted. Dynamic, you see that it evolves over time, but it needs continuous attention as a result because it is dynamic. And finally, reciprocal, you see it is mutual, give and take. So it influences engagement and trust. Now let's quickly look into the types of psychological contract. Psychological contract can take different forms depending on the nature of employment relationship, the time frame, and the level of emotional involvement. So 1995 identified three major types of psychological contract. The first one is transactional contracts. These are contracts which focus on short-term, specific, and tangible exchanges, be it, let's say, salary, benefits, or maybe some well-defined job responsibilities. So these are all typical transactional psychological contracts. So the characteristics of these transactional psychological contracts are that they are time-bound. Employees expect clear short-term rewards for their work, be it some salary, bonuses, etc. It is low emotional involvement is there when it is transactional. Work is seen as an economic exchange, not a personal or emotional investment, and you have performance orientation. Employees focus primarily on delivering results with less concern for long-term relationships. You look into the second aspect, relational contracts. Ladies and gentlemen, please note, relational psychological contracts, these are contracts that focus on long-term relationships, emphasizing trust, loyalty, and socio-emotional benefits. So the characteristics are essentially it is long-term, high emotional involvement, and there is reciprocity in growth. So a long-term employee, let's take an example, who stays with the company due to career growth or training or because of the supportive work culture comes under the relational contract. The third aspect is balanced contract, which is a typical mix of both relational as well as transactional psychological contract. A hybrid model, it is blending the transactional and relationship aspects where you focus on both performance expectations and ongoing employee development. So you see that there is performance and growth orientation, there is career flexibility, there is win-win relationship associated with the balanced contract. Let's take an example. A high potential employee who undergoes executive coaching to take on greater responsibilities comes under the balance contract. A project-based consultant who is given access to, let's say, a certification program to enhance their skills while delivering the results, that also can be an example. So when you talk about the types of psychological contracts, let's summarize it. We have different types: transactional, relational, balance. As we have seen, transactional is more short-term economic. It is all about the employee expectations like salary, benefits, deliverables, etc. You have an organizational expectations which is high performance and specific tasks. You look into an example, as I mentioned, freelancer or a commission-based sales executive can be a typical example. You look into relational, it is more long-term, loyalty-based. We need people who are more loyal to the system, career growth, job security, training. All these are employee expectations. You have commitment in terms of organizational expectation, loyalty again, discretionary effort. What would be an example is you are looking into loyal, long-term workforce, senior employees or leadership trainees. The third aspect, which is a hybrid model, a balanced perspective, it is all about performance and growth. So the employee expectation is results and development opportunities. The organization looks for flexibility and continuous learning. So what we have are high potential employees, career track managers, etc. Now let's look into the psychological contract, the importance of that in learning and development, the main aspect which we are focusing today. When you look into learning and development, you see that in many places, especially those that position themselves as learning organizations, employees come in with an expectation of continuous development, be it through training, mentorship, upskilling or career progression. So these expectations are often fostered by employer branding, onboarding messages or past experiences. So employees begin to perceive training and growth opportunities as part of their entitlement in exchange for loyalty and performance. You see that there is a fulfillment of development expectations, positive outcomes. When L&D initiatives align with employees' implicit expectations, the psychological contract is reinforced, resulting in several benefits. You see that there is enhanced trust and organizational commitment. You see that there is increased motivation and participation. You see that there is stronger psychological safety. All these aspects are consistently supported. Then you look into the breaches of development expectations, which is equaling the negative impact. Decreased engagement and morale is one aspect that comes out of the breach. Resistance to future learning opportunities. Opportunities is yet another aspect. Diminished organizational loyalty is also a critical aspect. So when you look into all these parameters, the implications for L&D professionals is that L&D teams must recognize that they are key players in maintaining or violating psychological contracts. So they should communicate clearly what developmental opportunities are available and what are not. Deliver consistently on training promises made during recruitment or performance reviews. Regularly assess, typically, whether employees' development expectations are evolving. And finally, align L&D strategy with both organizational goals and individual career aspirations. Now let's quickly look into the role of HR and L&D professionals in PC, in psychological contracts. One of the most critical responsibilities of L&D and HR professionals is to clearly communicate, transparent communication. What learning opportunities exist? Please tell. Training programs, certifications, mentorship, clear communication, who they are intended for, how they can be accessed. Lack of clarity can lead employees to form unrealistic expectations. For example, they might assume all employees will be sponsored for advanced degrees or executive coaching, which may not be the case. So, one aspect is transparent communication, another is setting realistic expectations for career progression. Employees often perceive these learning opportunities as pathways to promotions, recognition or strategic roles. So, the human resource department must set realistic timelines for growth. They must clarify eligibility criteria for development programs and please avoid over-promising during recruitment or appraisals. Another significant aspect would be ensuring equity in access to training and mentoring. So, perceived unfairness, or sometimes we call it as favoritism, in access to learning opportunities is always a frequent trigger for psychological contract strain. So, employees observe that who is sent to external training, who gets leadership coaching, or who has access to cross-functional projects or mentorship, if it is with only a chosen few, or some people who are in good books of their so-called managers or supervisors, this will create problems. And finally, managing perceptions before, during and after L&D intervention. So it is not just what HR and L&D do, it's also how employees perceive what's being done. So this makes perception management a key aspect of maintaining a healthy psychological contract. So what is before? Ensuring expectations are aligned. During, monitor employee experiences, be it the engagement, be it feedback, be it the barriers. And after, follow up on the impact. Example, how training is used, whether it is, influence role or recognition, all these aspects. So typically you see that these are the typical factors where a role of human resource and learning and development professionals converge. So in this particular discussion, I wanted to give you two things. One, a brief insight into what psychological contract is. What do you understand by psychological contract? Many a time we feel that if I want to summarize the entire discussion, let's say you as an individual, you put in more effort, much more than all of your colleagues. You might be thinking that, okay, I might get a recognition, or I might get a raise, or I might get a different position or promotion. But when it comes, it might not be a recognition, it might not be a reward. It might be that somebody else is getting the recognition. There is a fair possibility. All these cases, it was implicit. You expected something. This is a psychological contract that exists between employees and employers. Employers might not explicitly state. So that's where, when it comes in, there is a mismatch between expectations and actual delivery. So we have also tried to link the psychological contract with learning and development. We've also tried to understand the role of human resource department in a learning and development specific to psychological contract. In the coming sessions, we'll discuss more about learning and development vis-a-vis psychological contract. Thank you for listening to me patiently in this session. See you in the next class. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.